son at the table. They're not there. And how do we deal with this?
I think the which I think is going to be particularly important from people coming from the Orthodox community as they gain more and more power in the American Jewish community, is not to write those people off. Not to say, they're the fifth son, who needs them? They're halfway to being Episcopalians anyway. We're doing fine. We've got growing numbers. We teach our children Zionism. Our kids don't intermarry. And besides, we can always align with Sarah Palin and the evangelicals. They love Israel anyway. I think it's to have the sense of inter-Jewish solidarity, even empathy, to say, we want them at the table. Even though their Zionism will not be the Zionism of our kids, even though there may be fundamental different policies, that we feel a connection to them as Jews, and we believe that Israel will be better off if they are critical, maybe left-wing Zionists rather than being non-Zionist or anti-Zionist. It seems to me that's the challenge. You're right. There will never be one consensus Zionism in the United States. I don't think there needs to be. But I think the challenge is to draw the tent broadly enough so that it can encompass some of the people who would otherwise lose all of their Zionism altogether. And I think that would be a tragedy from a Jewish perspective, and I also think it would be dangerous for the security of the State of Israel, because one can only imagine we can only imagine the reaction amongst many non-American Jews, particularly on the left, if they start to see prominent, articulate, younger American Jewish voices arguing for one secular binational state. That position will become much, much more mainstream. I really believe that if we go 5 or 10 years of the status quo, that in fact that position will become much more mainstream than it is today, and that's a prospect that disturbs me.
Yes, sir, back there.
I'm just wondering if we're sort of all whistling into the wind. I mean, 30 years ago, there was a big rally in Tel Aviv for Peace Now, and 100,000 people showed up, and everyone said, look at this. This is a monstrous proportion of people showing up for this rally for peace against the war in Lebanon, and that this is a game changer. And we have these, these sort of Orthodox and non-Orthodox or left-right divide discussions, but right now in Israel, there was a rally yesterday, or the day before, of 100,000 people for segregated between Ashkenazi and Sephardic ultra-Orthodox schools. And that was just a small portion of ultra-Orthodox men who showed up to support Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox men, to support the notion of having segregated schools for Ashkenazi and Sephardic. And they now represent, I mean, the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi, represents a large proportion of the population, and the numbers in the schools are even more dramatic. I read a number that said that right now it's 1 in 5 children are being educated in Haredi schools, and the number is going to 1 in 4 within the next 12 years, 10 years. And of Jewish students, that's 1 in 3. I wonder if we're talking about a different country at this point. I mean,
it seems to me there are many, many, many things that we have to learn from Israel. Israel has created a culture that in some ways is more vibrantly self-critical, even under their conditions, than the United States. There are many, many, many things that we can learn from Israel. But I think we also have to have the self-confidence to see that, in fact, there are things that Israelis can learn from us. And in fact, one of the things that Israelis may be able to learn from us is, in fact, the way that Haredi Jews live in the United States, where Haredi Jews, in fact, are much, much more likely to work, where they are not, in fact, where there is not the ethos that they all have to be in kollel their entire lives, that they only have to live off the subsidy of the government. It seems to me that, in fact, there are lessons that Haredi Jews in Israel can learn from Haredi Jews in the United States, in some ways about the vibrancy that you can have when you've not decided to become simply dependent on state welfare. And so it seems to me within all of the different segments of the Jewish community, we should be confident enough to say that there are things in the way, there are values in the way we live that in fact can be valuable to Israel to learn from. I think particularly one of the things that bothers me about the evolution of Haredi politics in Israel is that there was historically amongst a lot of very important Haredi rabbis this great reverence for pekuach nefesh and this recognition that it was acceptable to withdraw from land if it meant saving lives. And my fear is that particular perspective which was associated with Rabbi Shach, for instance, which is even associated at one point, some claim with Rabbi Yosef, is in fact being undermined by the fact that the Israeli state is encouraging Haredi Jews to go into settlements in the West Bank and become part of the settlement project, when Haredi Jews historically were much less a part of it. So it seems to me there's work to do, it seems to me, about the evolution of Haredi politics in Israel as well.
Peter, do you have any red lines? Like, is there a point where you would just say, I can no longer support the state of Israel?
I mean, I don't like to go there, you know. But my fear is, I mean, I will tell you my fear. I mean, my fear is that settlement growth simply continues unabated. And that what happens is, while voices in the United States and amongst the Palestinians and around the rest of the world gravitate more and more towards this, I think, this utopian, fanciful, secular, binational, one-state solution position, that in Israel, the view that Israel should have as its agenda to find a way of getting the Palestinians out of the West Bank becomes a more and more mainstream position. There's already a lot of polling which suggests that a significant percentage of Israelis are open to those kind of ideas. If you said to, you know, if an Israeli leader came along and said, why don't we just give every Palestinian family who'll take it $10,000 and a bus ticket to Jordan? Or maybe you go a little further and say, maybe we should turn up the pressure on them a little bit, maybe encourage them a little bit in other ways to try to move. I think the vacuum, I think something will come to fill the vacuum. And the more and more people despair of the possibility of there ever being a Palestinian state, I think the more we will see this bifurcation towards an argument for one-state solution and an argument for Israelis to be creative about figuring out how to create a land in the West Bank that actually doesn't have so many Palestinians on it. And it seems to me once that space opens intellectually and morally, will be in a very dangerous place. And my fear is that American Jewish organizations, because they have had no practice in this policy of saying this is a red line for us, Avigdor Lieberman's policies towards Israeli Arabs are a red line for us, will, like the frog with the water that heats up and up and up, lose the capacity for moral outrage. Moral outrage is a skill. It has to be cultivated. You have to practice the courage to stand up and say things even if they're difficult to say. And it seems to me we lose that skill. We, in fact, suffocate that tendency within the organized American Jewish world. So that even when Beth Am, who is on record as saying he wants to expel the Palestinians, comes to our very universities as the representative of the Israeli government, we don't see any public criticism. I'm happy to talk with you afterwards, ma'am.
Not afterwards. I'd like to say my words. So Rabbi's ignoring it. Rabbi's ignoring it.
No.
Yeah, I take your point, and yet when you have an organization like the Conference of Presidents, that is the umbrella organization of a vast number of American Jewish organizations, and its position is no public criticism of the state of Israel. Certainly for people in Congress, AIPAC is the dominant organization that they deal with, deputized to deal with questions of Israel. So while there are lots of other Jewish organizations, often smaller Jewish organizations, that might have particular points of view, I think when it comes to Israel, AIPAC and the Conference of Presidents, particularly because the Conference of Presidents is an umbrella organization, are the ones that exercise far more weight. And particularly when you're dealing with Washington politics, where I think the vast majority of people who deal with Israel policy have actually never even heard of any of these smaller Jewish organizations you're talking about.